Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast, and thank you for being with me today as I continue my interview with Dr. Leonard Matheson, who is an expert on the human brain. And if you remember, I recently did a little two-part series myself entitled The Human Brain, Neuroplasticity, and Porn Addiction. That was episodes 153 and 154 of the Power of Purity podcast, if you'd like to check that out. And I was kind of talking about this stuff on my own kindergarten level, and I promised you guys I was going to try to get an expert on the human brain to be a guest on the show to help us understand this very important connection between the human brain and porn addiction and other sexual issues that we've struggled with in our lives. So I'm going to jump right back in with Dr. Matheson. He's going to help us understand this and help us understand the implications of this important connection so that we will have more information and more power to overcome the addiction and the struggles that we've had in this area of our life. So God bless you. I pray that today's episode will be a blessing, will be helpful and encouraging to you. So thanks for being here, and let's jump right back in with Dr. Matheson. So, Doctor, let me ask you this. Can you explain the concept of what's happening in a man's brain when he looks at porn? Or I guess we could say, really, when a person acts out in any addictive behavior, is it essentially the same activity in the brain, whether it's porn addiction, alcohol addiction, drug? Is there a difference? What's going on? But for our purpose, we're talking about porn addiction, sex addiction.
Okay. Well, remember I said that the female brain develops those linkages between the cortex and the limbic system earlier than the male brain.
Right.
Right? Talked about that a few minutes ago. That's one of the reasons I think women don't have as much a problem with porn addiction as men do. Because during adolescence, as the hormones are raging, we get attracted very naturally and intentionally by God to the opposite sex. And the hormonal commandment is to procreate. It's not appropriate as a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old, and we have other outlets then. And unfortunately, we haven't developed our society to a point where we can talk about what's appropriate to do. And so a lot of boys, and to a lesser degree girls, start to experiment with masturbation and viewing porn, other kinds of sexual excitation that just feels good.
And really, it's normal, right? Because a person's coming through puberty. It's as if their sexual self is coming alive. They're feeling feelings. The human body is making hormones. A person is transitioning from childhood to adulthood. And so there's a curiosity, and the body is going through this process. And so it's natural for a person to begin to, I guess, be curious, to pursue, to touch themselves, feel feelings. This happens.
Sure. And that's all driven by the feeling brain, the limbic system that's beneath the reasoning brain, the cerebral cortex. And as we learn, one of the key mechanisms for learning is fueled by a neurochemical called dopamine.
Yes.
And dopamine helps to strengthen linkages for things that we learn, and it could be, learning good values. It could be learning more knowledge, getting more knowledge, which we enjoy learning. It also has to do with learning the relationship between a pornographic stimulus and the good feeling that goes along with masturbation. And that linkage is fueled by dopamine. And it's the dopamine actually sends signals into the pleasure centers of the brain that solidifies and makes quite powerful to the point of being very difficult for the person to withstand. And that's when we get into addiction. The analog, the same exact thing happens with addiction to, for instance, cocaine. Cocaine sends a chemical messenger into the part of the brain that produces that dopamine and increases the dopamine output. And so the pleasure that we get from the cocaine is a turbocharged shot of dopamine into the pleasure centers of the brain. The pleasure that we get from an orgasm, masturbating, isn't as powerful, but it's nevertheless much more, it's quite compelling. It can be, depending upon how often the person is using porn, can develop into quite a strong habit to the point of being an addiction.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, is it fair to say that a person isn't really addicted to the cocaine or to the porn? They're really addicted to the dopamine, because the cocaine is like a trigger that releases the dopamine. The porn is like a trigger that releases the dopamine that feels so good, it makes me want to do that again.
Well, that's one way to look at it. If you didn't have the dopamine as the bridge, you wouldn't have the addiction, but you wouldn't learn either. I mean, the dopamine is not a bad drug at all. Dopamine is necessary for us to learn. When people have Parkinson's disease, one of the things that can happen with a fair number of folks as they start getting medicated for Parkinson's disease is that both men and women, they become hypersexual. And that's a temporary problem that, if the physician doesn't warn the person, can really disrupt marriages. The person who's just gone on the medication to treat the Parkinson's disease is taking in dopamine orally, and that, or it's not really dopamine. It's a drug that helps to develop dopamine in the brain.
So it kind of supercharges your dopamine system.
Yes.
And that somehow provokes this hypersexuality.
Yeah, and anything, yes, not just sexuality, but any addictive behavior. For instance, I've had a fair number of clients who've gotten themselves involved with gambling. And they would be straightforward, church-going accountants, bookkeepers, attorneys, physicians. All of a sudden, they disappear down into the boats and lose $20,000 in a weekend.
Wow.
And
that can get you in trouble with the wife.
Absolutely. And it has produced, real serious problems that people come to me for, and they're blaming the victim in the marriage is blaming the person who's just been treated for their Parkinson's. And part of my work with them is to get them to recognize that this is not her fault or his fault. This is the medication that you're taking for the Parkinson's disease. Now, it's not the majority of people who have Parkinson's disease who have this problem, but it's not. It's a pretty significant minority.
Okay. Now, in my kindergarten research, I found this acronym DOSE, D-O-S-E, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And some research I did refer to this combination of these four happy, feel-good chemicals in the brain. It's like a happy cocktail. Is it true that all four of these work together around porn addiction and sex addiction? Is it just the dopamine, or does oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins come into it also?
They all work together. That's right. Yeah, the most important is the dopamine, and the victim in that group of four is the oxytocin. Oxytocin is, some people call it the cuddle hormone.
Yes, bonding.
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated when I learned that when a woman, is this true, a woman is giving birth, the baby hasn't even come out yet, but she's in labor now, that her brain explodes with oxytocin, the bonding chemical. It's like God is a genius. So God did this. So now when the baby finally comes out, her body is full of oxytocin, her brain, which is, so as soon as she sees that baby, she bonds. It's like it's provoked, it's initiated by labor itself. So that's amazing.
Yes, it is. And I want you to think of another analog that you can relate to. If you've ever had a horrible toothache and you go to the dentist, and the dentist pulls the tooth or fills the cavity, and the toothache is no longer there, you don't fall in love with the dentist.
No.
But when you have a baby and you have that horrible pain for 2 hours or 8 hours or 24 hours.
Wow, that's a good way to put it, doctor. That's fascinating.
You really, and God knows we need to fall in love with that infant, because the infant is born helpless. It's not like a young colt who can be up on his or her feet in a couple of hours and starting to take care of, move around the corral.
Wow.
The human infant is much more helpless than any other mammal.
That's very fascinating way to put it. So, yeah, you would think this is the last time on planet Earth that your brain would make an explosion of oxytocin, this bond, when you're in this intense, unbelievable pain of labor. It seems almost contradictory. Why would you be bonding in the middle of this pain? But because the baby is coming out, God knew, I'm going to get her ready to bond with this new little baby. So it's just like the fingerprints of God. It's amazing.
That's right.
Praise be to God.
But in pornography, the person learns that they can have a shot of oxytocin in interaction with a computer screen or a magazine page. And that's very different from having intercourse with the person you love. Oxytocin is the oxytocin is released in both male and female brains when they have a loving interaction. And at birth is the huge flood of oxytocin, secondarily, but still quite powerfully during an orgasm. And the orgasm produces a flood of oxytocin in both bodies, not as strong as the flood that the mother experienced at the time of birth, but it's still quite powerful. And if you substitute that interpersonal experience for a solo experience, then oxytocin begins to wane. And you wind up having that begin to color your relationship with your spouse, where instead of having the flood of oxytocin after an orgasm with your spouse, it's more of a perfunctory sexual release rather than the bonding that God intended it to be.
Wow, that's very powerful. That's an amazing way to say it. So when a man is looking at pornography, is it fair to say that all four of these feel good, the happy chemical, dose, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, there's a kind of explosion or flood of these feel-good chemicals in the brain when he looks at porn? And then, is it true that the brain remembers that, or something's imprinted, and almost like the brain then remembers, hey, that felt really good because that gave me a dose of the four chemicals that I like, so the brain tells me, do that again, let's do that again because that felt good. So the brain actually starts to tell a person or compel a person, or like they want to do it again. The brain actually, is it fair to say the brain craves this over and over again, or what's going on there?
So the brain is learning how to get pleasure. And so to the degree that the simple early neural networks were there that demonstrated the relationship between the porn activity and the pleasure, one of the ways to best look at the relationship between porn viewing and porn addiction is that it's a learned experience. We were designed to look at a beautiful naked body and to have a positive experience there. The problem becomes when we take it out of context. And out of context is outside of a committed relationship, outside of a mutually shared loving relationship. And the porn addiction has hijacked the stimulus and tied it to a process where we're learning as God intended us to, but it's sidetracked it from an interpersonal experience with a loved one to a completely impersonal experience with a computer screen or a page in a magazine.
Wow.
And what happens there, one of the things that happens there, aside from it being a learned experience that continues to be reinforced and made stronger and stronger and stronger, so that you have a sense of craving it, is that the oxytocin dries up and you wind up not having a good relationship with your spouse, the person you're supposed to have a good relationship with.
So even though you have a sexual, intimate encounter with your spouse, but it's like the oxytocin is diminished in that interpersonal relationship because it's so used to coming out between me and the computer screen.
Exactly.
Wow. It's almost like I'm retraining my brain on where it should release the oxytocin.
That's correct.
Wow. That is amazing. So I feel like this is a really, really important question. And it's, if a man is struggling with porn addiction, then what does he need to do in order to break that addiction or to retrain his brain so he's no longer addicted to the porn? How do I teach my brain, I'm a Christian man, I don't want to do this anymore. I want my oxytocin to come back between me and my wife, not me and my computer screen. Like, how do I do this? How does a guy practically, what does he do?
One of the reasons that I accepted your invitation is the title of your show, Purity, and that's a simple but really important starting point. It's important to recognize that the impulse to have that addiction is down at the limbic system level. It's driving the behavior, but the cortical, the top part of the brain, that's the thinking part of the brain, the rational part of the brain.
The cerebral vortex.
Cerebral cortex.
Cortex, yes.
Is able to impose control, but you need help. For instance, probably talking to your pastor, a counselor, beginning to set things in motion so that purity is easier, and slips or relapses are handled properly. One of the problems with working with men and women who have porn addictions is that a slip or relapse feels so strongly punitive that they just freeze in shame. God has made available Jesus to us to help us bridge that gap and to recognize that we're broken people that need help. Not that we're not going to feel the shame, but that we're going to feel it and then not get completely traumatized to the point that we can't move from it. We can't learn from it.
It doesn't have to sabotage my forward progress.
Correct. It's a bump in the road rather than there's the breakdown of the whole vehicle.
So it's okay if it's 2 or 3 steps forward, then a step back, and then 2 or 3 steps forward and a step back. I like to say it's a messy process. Typically, it isn't a neat, clean, linear process, recovery. It's hard. It's work. And it's messy.
And it involves God, Jesus, and others to help us out. We really need the help.
Doctor, you said something there that was intriguing to me. This idea of the cerebral cortex, the top of the brain, which is the cognitive information part of the brain. So that part of my brain is telling me the information. Tony, don't do this. This is wrong. God doesn't want you to do this. It's disobedience to God. If your wife finds out, you're going to get in trouble. What if your friends at church find out? You're going to feel bad after you do it. So why do it? My cerebral cortex is telling me this information. And yet, there's another part of my brain that is almost like been strengthened or more powerful, that even though I know these things, it's almost like impotent or something. It doesn't empower me to make the quality decision that I need to make.
That's right. So what do we do? Well, we set up contingencies. So as the person recognizes that, there's something else that needs to be done, and the person has planned that ahead of time. So it might be to call somebody who's also in recovery, who's a little further along, a sponsor. It might be to get down on your knees and pray, to actually have time with God on your knees away from the porn addiction, to see if you can at least postpone it, if not avoid it entirely for that evening. It might be going out and taking a run, doing something that doesn't fit with the behavior of going and acting on it, because that will simply strengthen the relationship between the stimulus and your behavior.
So you have to interrupt that desire. Your brain is having this craving. Your brain basically is kind of like saying, hey, give me my dopamine fix. I want to have that feel-good thing. Let's go do this again. That makes me feel good. So you're feeling that itch. So you want to scratch. Your intuition is to do what you've been doing the past 9 years in your addiction and act out again. But now I'm trying to change. So when my body is feeling that, my brain is craving that, I've almost like got to interrupt my body and my brain, and I've got to deliberately choose to do something else to interrupt that.
That's right. And so what I talk with people about, what else gives you pleasure that's not compatible with this behavior? It might be, and people have all kinds of different things that certainly aren't as pleasurable. There's no denying the potent pleasure for a few minutes, but there are other things in the person's life that are pleasurable.
Yes.
So we take a look at what can you do to sidetrack this and postpone it.
Distract yourself enough to maybe get over that speed bump.
Yes.
So let me ask you this way, Doctor. Let's say that you're going to be the guest speaker at a special seminar. There's going to be 500 men there. And all 500 of these men, they're Christian men, and they all are struggling with porn addiction. They're all acting out in this way. And so we gathered these guys together. We're trying to help them with this struggle. And we have a special guest speaker, Dr. Leonard Matheson. So what would you want to say to these men? What would you share with them that would inspire them, instill hope and recovery and possibility and healing? What is your message? What do these men need to know?
The very first thing I would do is have us all stand up and hold hands and recite the Lord's Prayer.
Wow.
And I would do it slowly so that we can get as much meaning out of it as possible. And not just meaning at the rational cerebral cortex level, but let it rumble down to our limbic system, where you hear those deep voices and every man around you earnestly asking God to move us along down his road rather than our road. And then I'd have everybody sit down. And we'd then talk about some of the practical aspects of it. I'd probably give them a little education about what's going on in the brain. And I give them some examples of people who've been successful in curbing it and moving on into deeper relationships with their loving spouse, with their children, with people in general.
Awesome.
One of the problems that happens with either men or women, it happens both ways, is that if you have a porn addiction, male or female, you begin to objectify other people out in the world, and so you've got a colleague at work that you begin to look at as a sexual object, which is entirely inappropriate and can get you in trouble at work too. Plus, it just stops you from being able to do your job as well as you need to do it.
There's many reasons that this is inappropriate.
Yeah, it's not just the relationship with your spouse that's getting messed up.
So is there anything else at this point, Doctor, that we need to know about the brain or that you would share with us that is significant, but I'm not smart enough to know that I should ask Dr. Matheson this question?
That's a great question in and of itself. So there's a particular part of the brain that called the hippocampus that is an intermediary place where information is stored for a brief period of time that sets us up for long-time learning. And one of the things that I do that you can do starting tonight is before you go to bed, after your prayers and just before you fall off to sleep, bring to mind something that you did during the day that helps you to develop a character strength that you want to develop. So, for example, courage is a character strength that a lot of people feel like they'd like more of. During the day, choose to do something that's somewhat courageous. It doesn't mean jump in front of a bullet. It means there are lots of ways to be courageous, to be different, and to do what, well, take a look at Romans, all the things that Paul encourages us to do to change our lives. That if you come up with two or three of those during the day, and then before you drop off to sleep at night, bring those to mind. Those are the last things that are going into your hippocampus as you drop off to sleep. Over the course of the night, the hippocampus processes that information, and you wake up the next morning with a new neural network started, or the expansion of a neural network that's committed to your character strength of courage. And over a period of 30 days, 30 nights, repeating that, you're not only giving yourself a good message into your hippocampus that allows it to change your brain, you're also changing your behavior during the day because you're looking for opportunities to be courageous. So at the same time that your brain is changing at night, your behavior during the day is changing. And at the end of the month, you'll be more courageous.
Wow.
And you can do that with pretty much any character strength.
But you focus on that same concept of courage for 30 nights in a row. You focus on the same theme, in other words.
Yes, and it doesn't need to be courage. It can be generosity. It can be kindness. Pick a character strength. There are 24 of them altogether. And those character strengths are available to all of us. We have them in generally pretty low degrees. Some of us have much more of one than another. But we can actually participate with God to use the mechanisms that He's given us in our brains to guide that development of our behavior in some very healthy ways.
So is there a way that a man could do this specifically to try to break his addiction and to strengthen his commitment to his purity walk? Could he focus on the concept of purity for 30 nights in a row? Think about, I'm going to do something every day. For example, there's a billboard with a woman. I'm going to avert my eye. I'm going to turn my eyes because purity, I'm pursuing purity now. And then when he goes to bed that night, he thinks to himself, I remember today, I went by that billboard. I turned my eyes because purity is important to me. I'm becoming a man of purity. And now he goes to sleep. So the last thing he's thinking of as he drifts into sleep, and he put into his hippocampus, not hippopotamus, he put into his hippocampus thoughts of purity. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is, absolutely. And not just thoughts of purity, but they're based upon an episode during the day in which you acted with greater purity. So, for example, another one that's very pertinent to most men, let's say that you have an opportunity to congratulate members of your team, and there are 3 men and 3 women there. You give the men each a hug. What do you do with hugging a woman if you've got a problem with porn addiction? And you make a choice ahead of time about how you're going to handle that. And you act on that. And at night when you go to bed, you realize you acted intentionally to not trigger yourself inappropriately with whatever choice you made. You may wind up so that you can maintain a social standing among all 6 of those people, a handshake with every one of them, or a backslap. But you didn't do something that would put you in a position to feel excited by your involvement with the 3 women on your team that you're not supposed to be excited about.
Right.
They're not sex objects, they're teammates.
And is this, doctor, the concept of neuroplasticity and retraining the brain, that if I do this 30 days in a row, my hippocampus, while I'm sleeping, is beginning a new neural pathway, and then I do another purity action the next day, and think about it again, put it in my hippocampus, and that night it follows the same neural pathway. So I'm doing this 30 nights in a row. So I'm carving a new neural pathway and strengthening like my brain's ability to be committed to purity. Like somehow this is breaking the addiction and it's strengthening my ability to resist the addiction and to make better decisions and to be committed to my purity walk.
That's exactly right. You got it.
Wow. So it's like the concept of a rivulet. There's a crack in the ground on a hill, and it rains, and the water flushes down that crack and makes it a little bit bigger. Then it rains again and again and again. Each time that groove gets bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper. And if you came back in 20 years, there'd be a big ravine there because the water carved out. So we're flushing something through our brain. It's carving a new pathway, and each time it's strengthening me to resist that old temptation and it's like breaking the addiction.
And remember I said that's a good metaphor. And I remember I said, though, that goes along with the prayers that you're offering at night to ask God to give you the strength to continue to move forward with your intentionality.
Yes. And which typically, this is the importance of recovery when a guy comes to the place where he's really trying to fight this and he's working on this and he's committed to it. He's meeting with other men. Maybe he's seen a therapist, whatever he's doing, but he's got to the place where he's ready to seriously work on this. Then these are the kind of exercises that give him something to do that he can focus on and work on that create the possibility of progress and hope and change and healing and redemption. But the point being, it's like, praise be to God that the brain can be refashioned. The brain can be retrained. I can create new neural pathways that get stronger and stronger. And the old pathways, when I'm creating that new one, doctor, is it like the old one starts getting weaker and weaker because the new one's getting stronger?
Essentially, yes. We have a whole lot of things happening, but it's a combination of those. And it really is amazing, the tools that God has given us. We just need to use them.
Wow. Praise be to God. So this really, really helps me as a purity counselor, and I work with a lot of men through this purity ministry. I feel like this is a very tangible, practical, doable, hands-on, black and white. Guys are like, what do I do? Give me an assignment. Like, okay, here's your assignment. I'm going to create this thing, 30 days to purity. And I can only imagine, by the way, that as you walk that out, 30 days is a good place to start. But imagine if a guy did it for 60 days and then 90 days and then 120. The longer you do it, the more that neural pathway's getting established and deeper and deeper. And so he's becoming stronger and stronger, and the addiction's being broken, and there's a metamorphosis now. He's literally becoming a new man. Mm-hmm. And sex doesn't have to control him anymore because he's learning to control sex the way God always wanted him to.
Yes, that's right.
Praise be to God. So the assignment would be to take an action step of purity every single day, whether it's turning your eyes or choosing to memorize a scripture about purity, or, there's a pop-up on my computer screen.
Let me expand it.
Go ahead, yes.
Let me expand it beyond that. Doing something that's incompatible with your behavior that you don't want is the key.
Okay.
And there are lots of things that are incompatible with your behavior. If you think purity is the goal, but there are lots of things that you can do during the day that are incompatible with being impure.
I could read my Bible.
Well, and a lot of things that that would be good for you to do. You can go out and work in the garden to do something out there that's constructive. You can, if you're going to have problems with, for instance, online porn, you can ration yourself to only look at YouTube videos that are constructive or are funny or in some way not going to cause you to have trouble with impurity. So you're making a choice to do something to gradually change your behavior and make that rivulet into a stream, into a river.
Okay, very good.
So your creativity is crucial, though. Everybody's going to be different about what they're going to have to do.
So the point being, it doesn't have to specifically be around the topic of sex or purity. It could be any positive action, such as working in my garden.
Right. Well, and it could, for instance, the working in the garden point is that you would go to bed that night thinking, okay, I gave myself a method to have self-control. I had integrity to maintain my purity for one more day by working in my garden. It wasn't you're patting yourself on the back for working in the garden. It's you're patting yourself on the back and reminding yourself that you have self-control, which is another character strength, through choosing something ahead of time, planning on doing something that's incompatible with acting on your porn addiction.
I understand. Very good. But then the key isn't just doing that during the day, it's reinforcing it on your hippocampus that night to deliberately think about that before you go to sleep.
Right.
And then repeat that again the next day and the next day and the next day. And you're saying that after 30 days, for some reason, that's about how long it takes to start altering the brain and creating a new neural pathway and creating something new.
Right, and I can give you the reasons if we had more time, but that's the neurobiology of it. That's right.
Wow, I'd be fascinated to hear that. So there's a reason that 30 days, it's significant. It means there's a scientific reason that 30 days matters.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk another time about all that.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And I want to respect your time, and I see that we're right at our hour. But I wanted to get to your book, so before we finish, I had a list of questions, but can I just ask you, can you tell us just a little bit about Your Faithful Brain, your book? Let me maybe ask this question. In Your Faithful Brain, Dr. Matheson introduces several powerful brain capacities that you can harness through an active relationship with God. You take advantage of these capacities by developing a faithful brain. Can you explain, in a nutshell, what do you mean by this concept of a faithful brain?
So, God designed us to participate with Him in living our lives. We have free will, but we have the optimum free will within the context of a relationship with God. God is demanding, but God also wants us to participate by being creative with who we are. He's joyful when He sees us helping each other and doing things that are affirming of life. And so if we start by recognizing that we need to participate with God and not just allow ourselves to sit on the couch, but actually do things in our lives that move us in the direction God wants us to move, following Romans 12:2 as the best example of that, we will be aware of God's perfect will for our lives. We'll have a sense of that. It will guide us in the right direction. And that's really, for me, marching orders. Romans 12:2 is a real good place for each of us to start and to go on from there. But there's so much in the Bible that guides us to develop faithful brains. I really think that back in the days when people weren't aware of their brains as much as their hearts, when the Bible was written, the heart showing up 1,000 times and the brain not showing up once, but the mind being mentioned several dozen times. People were aware of the heart being the seat of consciousness because as we did things that were good or bad, our heart beat stronger and helped us to feel either good or bad about what we had just done. And that was as much as we could know about God's direction. Now we've got a lot more ability to be discerning by recognizing that, for example, addiction is entirely contravening God's perfect will for our lives. Back in David's day, he took advantage of his power to have an illicit relationship with another woman. He recognized that very quickly and surrendered to God and learned from it. But he wasn't assailed by having her nude in front of him day in and day out. He acted on it. He felt bad about it. He didn't continue doing that. We have a much tougher row to hoe because porn is available 24/7.
Yes.
It's so difficult to avoid it.
Accessibility, yeah, in your face.
That's true.
Yes, Doctor, thank you so much. Can I ask you to finalize with just a brief prayer, finalize our episode?
Sure.
Thank you.
Father, thank you so much for bringing us together and giving us this opportunity to further your work in this world. Thank you for giving us new tools to use, some ideas that we can consider, the people around us who care about helping us move in the right direction. Thank you so much for this program that helps so many people and that's moving people towards you, even as we're dealing with problems that we know are insoluble without you. We've got a sense that we're powerless unless we turn to you. And if we turn to you, our weakness makes you so powerful, and we welcome that. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your son, Jesus, who's made all of this possible, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Doctor, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Purity podcast. It's been a blessing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye now. And guys, with that being said, we're going to bring this episode of the Power of Purity podcast to a close. Thank you to Dr. Leonard Matheson for being our special guest. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys right back here next week. In the meantime, have an awesome week, have an awesome day, and God bless you as you continue with your pursuit of God and your pursuit of purity. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.